Mhm.
Hi, everybody. Pen here with Yogacises. I have Stephanie Olga here. We met online and we just connected. I'm really excited to have her here. She's a yoga instructor, Reiki practitioner. She does aromatherapy, and she's been traveling around. So it's like really amazing for her to listen to her story. And welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's get started with your yoga journey. How did you, choose yoga, and how did you get Reiki and other practices involved?
I think yoga chooses you, I guess, for some people, and something kind of came into my world in the early 2000s. Part of it was physical, and the other part of it had a lot to do with rewiring the neural network. I started to get really interested in neurobiology. I started to get interested in quantum physics. And around the same time, I was also dropping into some spiritual teachings that were in alignment. A lot of ancient scriptures as far as yogic philosophy goes, some scriptures and information and ways to live as far as some old school Buddhist philosophies and Taoist philosophies. And I had always been introduced and had information on other religions of different varieties. What struck me most was at their core, when you really dug deep enough, they were really all the same and asking you to live the same way from a loving, compassionate place. And that always spoke to me. It didn't make sense for me to live a life that was always just based on me. I always wanted to live a life of service. And I started out doing that, thinking I was going to do that in the mental health field. I knew from an early age I wanted to get into psychology because I was a little concerned with psychiatry and the pharmaceutical aspect of it. I thought there was a lot to gain out of talk therapy and people feeling like they were heard and they were being expressive and they were healing in that aspect. And the more I kind of delved into that world, the more it became a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of kind of fighting the system. And I thought, well, I could spend all day in a lab researching some things that I think are really cool, or I can find a different way to be a hands-on healer. And I didn't actively necessarily seek out one modality. I just decided to break out of the societal mold that I was in that, was a little bit from the outside world, a little bit some from my family. I come from a family of immigrants. I'm only a second generation American. And as much as I love the work ethic that they were able to instill in me, I also had been boxed into this mindset and category of individual, and I had never stopped working, never stopped taking classes. And I thought I needed something different. I just needed a little bit of a timeout to kind of reassess what was going on in my world. There was all these things rapidly changing. And finally, when I graduated from university, I had relocated to another state for the graduate program and decided I was going to take time off. For the first time ever, I was going to stop what I was doing. I was just going to take a break. I was going to breathe and let life happen instead of having this plan and having to achieve something and these goals set. And I started traveling. And then when I went overseas, it was just a constant breaking down of these societal expectations, and an embracing of life that wasn't available for me in the way and where I lived necessarily in the United States. So I've been traveling on and off for the last 15 years, and I've only stayed in one place for about a year. A couple places I stayed for a year, but as soon as that year was up, I left. And some places I only stayed for as long as a few weeks, a few months, and I basically just keep going. I have been able to afford to do that because I do a lot of volunteer work in between. So I trade my time for food and accommodation, and that allows me to really delve into my own spiritual practice and also to carve out little times for more intensive spiritual trainings, different workshops, and full immersive teacher training programs where most people couldn't necessarily say, I'm just going to stop my life and go to this program for a couple months. But I didn't have a life to stop, it was always just what's going to come next. And so I would always let what was supposed to happen just flow into my life a little bit more organically than trying to force things to fit. And that just has finally brought me full circle. For the first time, I'm now in the United States, in Arizona, and staying still. I signed a lease. I'll be here for, the next year and a half for sure. And we'll kind of see where it goes from there. But for the first time here, since I'm here full time and I'm not moving, I'm actually doing all of this stuff full time. So I spend a great deal of time just juggling my schedule. I teach a lot of restorative yoga classes. I do a lot of Reiki healings, a lot of sound therapy, some vinyasa work, some meditative work. Really, it's all the same at the end of the day under that big umbrella of what the West calls yoga or meditation. In the East, there's a dozen different names for it, and we just kind of lump it under this one category. So that's a lot of what I spend my time with now.
That's awesome. I love the traveling part. It's like everybody's on the interview has been sharing how their traveling experience is like, and you've been to so many different places. What are some of the places that really like impacted you the most, and your experience in those places, one or two?
I know that years ago when I was in Switzerland, I loved it. I just thought this place is super cool and I'd really like to come back here. Outside of that, each place resonated with me depending on where I was in my journey. And it might have been everything I needed right then and there. And it might be a place I have no intention of ever going back to. So I really hesitate to pick one location, but I'm really grateful that on my journey, I had these different abilities to kind of find and drop into these places that were meant for me. I was fortunate enough when I was in Indonesia to get connected to a couple different teachers and also connected to a little bit of myself and a message from the universe. So I definitely valued my time there. I was only there for about 4 weeks, a little over, right around the 1 month period for the travel visa. And I got a lot out of that limited amount of time. Outside of that, it's just been a blessing to have the opportunity to see how much faith you could have in the universe and really be provided. If you jump into something with the expectation that I'm here to provide service and I'm going to do so willingly with as much compassion and patience and understanding as I can, you get so much out of it. And even the situations where it was almost hellish and really a physical struggle to deal with the situation, or sometimes even mental and emotional, because there were times where I actively engaged in normal society and maybe had to work to pay for my plane ticket from one location to the other. And even those circumstances where I might have been dealing with a level of anxiety or an individual who was really teaching me something, how to maintain a level of peace and comfort, even while having to deal with the external world. I was so grateful for those experiences because you just can't have them. Somebody has to play the villain in your world. Somebody has to kind of poke at you and show you where your weaknesses are. And to have that opportunity to kind of delve into that, I am definitely grateful for, because I always thought, oh, I could be the yogi, you could throw me in a cave and I could learn how to meditate and I could sit there for years. But it's not until you come out of the cave and you start to test the practices in a real world environment and really see, can you interact with other people and in other situations without losing that peace, without staying connected to the source and sitting in that seat of grace. And I think that's where the real practice is. You can sit on your mat or in your cave for years, but it's not until you come out and have to engage with everybody that you really figure out, did the teachings take hold? Did they work? Am I able to interact in those kind of situations and still just sit in that peace of mind? So they've all been really a blessing.
That's awesome. I'm thinking of the like, if people haven't experienced it yet, how would you basically like advise them to reach that state?
I think first and foremost, it comes with taking some stuff off your plate, making some holes in your schedule, because until you spend time with yourself, nothing else really adds up to anything. You can continue to fill your day with all these activities. You can choose to try to define them as meaningful or not. And the mind is just going to continue to play those tricks on you. It's going to continue to be attachment, aversion, attachment, aversion. You're just going to flow from one desire to the next. And then the next minute, the thing that you desired is just going to bring you suffering. And so until you clear your schedule a little bit and make the effort to just sit still with yourself and that mind chatter, and then realize that you can disassociate, that that chatter isn't me. The ego and the personality and the layers, those aren't me. You know, at the end of the day, who's upset with the situation? Because who's really there? There is no person. You start to drop in between and you become that seer who can start to observe the movie that's happening without necessarily emotionally attaching to every single thought process that bubbles to the surface. But if you don't create the space, it can't necessarily happen because there's too much stuff, too much clutter, too much chatter that's in the way. So really just deciding that this is important to me, this journey I think is calling to me. You get to the point where it's that constant nagging that no matter what you do, whether your wind down thing has to do with maybe going to the bar or just talking to a couple friends or sitting around with your family, your pets, or whatever it is. But there comes a time where you really have to make an effort to drop into that space and deal with the stuff that comes up. And then you realize then there's no more skeletons in the closet. There's no more demons to kind of shake and rattle you to this other place. And then it starts to become very peaceful. But it takes time. And I think a meditative practice is what we call it. But eventually just getting to the place where you can be aware of the sensations in the body and learn to connect to the breath. It really is what's going to take you there in the beginning, is really just being mindful and aware, noticing the inhales, noticing the exhales, and falling into that center, and then listening and being the space that exists in between the thoughts.
That's so true. Like, oh, I want to be in that state right now. That's so true. You really do need that. Like, everybody needs that for feeding the mind, the body, the spirit, like everything, for it to basically be able to carry out the rest of the day and everything, and all the tasks that you have to do, like outside of that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned quantum physics. How do you, because my husband was talking about it the other day. I'm like, I honestly don't really know much about it. Maybe some listeners might be interested in learning more about it. So tell us more about the quantum physics and how it fits in everything.
For me, it was a way of my scientific analytical mind to be able to take what I was reading about and find a different way to digest it. So some people will never need it. Their mind isn't overly analytical. They come from a place of pure devotion, and their path is completely different. Whereas my mind always worked on a logical, scientific, analytical level, and it wanted things to be efficient. It wanted things to be mathematical. It wanted to make sense of things in a certain way. And when I started getting into some of the different theories and philosophies about reality and the perception of time, the description and the explanation for things about there not being one relative truth was what helped me, because there were all these other, what I call arrows, that were pointing in the same direction. So a lot of what I consider to be enlightened sages or ascended masters, or people who have been of this planet in some form or another, who have left behind these messages or these discourses, that when you kind of read them, for some people, different teachers will resonate for each individual. And all the people I had come in contact with, their their verbiage that really resonated with me, but most of the time those spiritual masters, until recently, they were gone. They weren't of this planet anymore. And I didn't necessarily understand or have a way to connect with them on another realm or at another level at that time. And so I had these teachings that made perfect sense to me. But then there was another part of the mind that gets involved, that when it found this little quantum physics, explanation for things, it was like a bigger, broader understanding, which still at some point is just knowledge until you have experiential wisdom, until you go through and you have that experience and that actually becomes your truth. It is still just collective information. But for some reason in my world, being able to quantify and break down scientifically the idea of this physical world, being able to learn and explain that everything is not solid, it's just merely a vibration. All of that really helped my sound healing, because then I was able to explain it in a different way. I was able to absorb it in a different way, knowing that everything is just this constantly moving vibration that can be a wave or a particle, depending on how we choose to interact with our reality based on our belief system, is just kind of mind-blowing, because it literally explains everything that the mystics have been saying for generations, that we can control and manifest everything that we want, that we truly have the ability to sit in a seat of pure abundance, that we are both the creators and the creation at the same time. And it's just strange that this science is still so new and all of a sudden has come to figure out, wait a minute, what we're explaining now is exactly what they've been saying this entire time. That depending on how we believe and how we choose to interact with the molecules in the space, we see space, but it's this interconnected web. And I have, the ability to reach from where I am to across the other side of the universe through the web, essentially, and immediately. And if you can do that, you can manipulate all the particles that make up this material world. So it really goes far deep within the rabbit hole, depending on what you're ready to receive and how your mind works. And then for me in my meditation, it was almost a way, when I would leave my body and come back, I would sometimes tell people I kind of feel like a Picasso painting. I feel like what I understood before mentally about quantum physics and the particles and the movement and the space between the particles, I felt like I experienced it. And I was like, oh, that's right. My body's not solid. It's just a collection. It's a community of things that are constantly living and dying and blinking in and out of existence. So if they're doing that on a tiny level, I must be doing that on a grand level. But to be able to kind of tap into that power takes a lot of time and a lot of rooting of subconscious beliefs, because we can say at the surface, I believe this or I feel this way, but we have these habit patterns that have kind of sunk really deep, and we have to sort of find a way to pull them out by the root and really come full circle. There's Dr. Bruce Lipton and a couple other people in the epigenetics world that have been able to show the simple power of belief structure can completely change and alter the proteins that switch on the genetic markers for our DNA. So we've been arguing this whole time, is it nature versus nurture? And as it turns out, it doesn't have to be either. It's technically both. We've kind of known that for a while. But at the same time, you can pull apart both and decide for yourself how you want it to be. But you have to believe it. And so I think quantum physics was a way for me to get my conscious mind to believe some of the things that I kind of knew on a deeper level, that seeds had been planted, but it was just the way that my mind wanted to wrap itself around the concepts in another way. And it was easier for me to take that information and then also give that to people in a package that they can understand. So maybe some people are really ready for their spiritual journey, and explaining things in that way, they might be really receptive to. But I also knew that there was a whole group of people that needed to hear it from an anatomical world, that needed to hear it from a scientific viewpoint, that need to hear it from a nutritional standpoint. So again, all these arrows point to the same thing. They're paths that line up, that run parallel, that essentially get you to the same place. But you might not be receptive if the teacher only says it one way. And so I wanted to be well-rounded and be able to explain it to an audience that was filled with mindsets from all over the place. So that's one of the other things that it helped me with, was digesting things in my world, but also helping me to package it for other people.
That's so interesting. It was like, wow, this is amazing. Didn't even think of it in terms of like, all the things that you mentioned. You mentioned the meditation and got in terms of are you talking about astral projection or not really?
I think for me that's just happened on its own. It's something I have read about and was interested in, especially when I realized I could lucid dream, which I didn't even know was a thing until many years ago. I was describing a dream to somebody who got really excited when I was telling them in the dream that I knew I was dreaming, and so I decided to do all these other things. And based on that person's reaction, I started digging all this information up about lucid dreaming and astral projection and all these other things. And I studied it for a while. I was even doing some daytime activities so that I could switch on the lucid dreams in the evening. And many of them worked, and I kept a dream journal for quite some time. I still go back to it occasionally, but now I typically try to stay as conscious and lucid as I can all the time. As my spiritual progress and journey has deepened, I look at sleep as being a preparation or an exercise for the death process. Not a lot of people are ready to hear that right away, but we can get to a place where we're pretty unconscious outside of the dreaming state when we get into a deep state of sleep. And my idea, and many practices incorporate the same thing, is trying to stay in a semi-lucid, semi-conscious place when you allow the body to rest, which is why I'm really interested and spend a lot of time with sound healing devices and bringing that to a lot of people. Because you can slip in and out of this lucid place of consciousness while the body dips way deep into a place of relaxation. It allows the cells to repair and heal. So I try to maintain that when normal people would call it going to sleep. I haven't gotten to the point where I sit up in a meditative state all night long. I do like to have that real relaxation where I go horizontal and just let the heart relax a little bit, not have to pump up the system so much. And I kind of stay in that place instead of more incorporating or actively trying to astral project or lucid dream, but actually stay lucid and aware all the time. It doesn't always happen. I have left my physical form during different meditations, not necessarily on purpose. I don't think going into a meditation with a specific desire is overly helpful for people, because then you have an attachment to something, you have an expectation to a certain outcome. And I think it's better to just eliminate a lot of that and create the space and allow the experience that's meant for you in this specific place in your journey to happen, to manifest. So if you clear that space and just let what's supposed to come in happen, you'll usually find it's even more than you could possibly imagine. We sometimes limit ourselves with our expectations because we're only using the limited mind that we have available to us. And in every moment, we have the ability to evolve and expand. And so if I'm trying to project a future out of my physical place right now, I might be projecting a really limited future for myself, because I might not even be as open or creative as I think I am to imagine an even bigger, more abundant future for myself. So I don't go into some of the meditations or into sleep with that idea or expectation, and rather just allow them to happen and know that sometimes they do for me. So when I've gone to different places, different levels of consciousness, what could be described as different dimensions possibly. I feel like I've connected my level of consciousness with what I consider the source to be. I also think that we are all ultimately the source, and at some point it's not connecting with it, but actually falling into and realizing that you are both the wave and the ocean. And that just takes some time. And for some people, the astral projecting, or what I think happens for a lot of people during sound healings, I do think that can be beneficial, because for some people, that's their gateway to experiencing a level of consciousness without their physical body. And when you can start to take those journeys, then you realize, maybe I don't need to be fearful of the death process, because then you realize consciousness exists outside the physical form. And if I can do it willingly, then I can leave willingly when the body is no longer willing to support this journey. I can travel outside without this physical form that's guaranteed to go back to the earth. It lives and dies all day long, and at some point the cells won't rejuvenate, to be as vital as you need to maintain the level of depth for your journey anymore. So by having those kind of experiences and realizing, wait a minute, that thing that I identify as me, it's really not. I have this whole other consciousness, this definition of self outside this body. I think it starts to change things for people. I think it's more than just planting seeds, because now you've given them an experience. And I think that's what's most important for teachers to do, is never to tell somebody this is how it is or this is how it has to be. It's only, this is how my journey's been, and I'm here to offer you tools to take your journey, to experience your truth, because it might be different than mine. And again, I think that's what traveling and what, you were asking with quantum physics, one of the things that was able to help me, because my mind, because it worked scientifically in the beginning, it was very yes or no, black or white. This either is or it isn't. It's either efficient or it's not. And then I realized there are so many realities in between, because each person is only living based on their experience. So you can never give somebody a one-size-fits-all explanation to anything. You can only give them tools and hope that they will take the tools, have their own experience, and they will come back with their own truth. And you won't have to convince them of anything, because they'll have figured it all out for themselves. I think that's important in finding a real yoga or meditation or whatever you want to call it, any kind of energy healer or guide, is essentially the term I like to use for people. Is I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm here to offer suggestions and help guide you on your journey when you feel like you're a little bit stuck and you're not sure what's supposed to come next.
Wow, that's amazing. Like, as you're talking, I'm seeing your aura. I usually don't see people's auras, but I'm seeing this like calm. I don't know if it's white, because I don't really know. I haven't practiced yet, but I can almost sense like a white aura around you. It's pretty pretty.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few things that the thing is, I think I might have tried to get into that state, but I always like immediately as I feel it, I got myself out of it, because I was almost like I'm scared of it. It's like a fear of getting into it. Especially I feel like when I do a guided meditation, when I'm teaching, I feel that more than during my own practice. And I just once I feel it, I kind of just like freeze up and I don't know what to do.
I think there are a couple different ways to approach it. One is to just know that that's the mind and the ego that doesn't want to let go. And one way recently I have tried to give a explanation or an analogy for it is to think of, if you're into any science fiction or different films or books you might have read, when the artificial intelligence or the superhuman computer that we make in some of these films or books, it starts to become this self-sufficient device. and then it tries to overcome its makers, right? Like you see all these utopian communities where the superhuman that we created in that particular film or dialogue decides that it knows better, decides that it's going to be in control and tries to take over humanity. And that's kind of how I look at your mind or your ego. It's you, and really at the end of the day, it doesn't exist. It's kind of an artificial intelligence. But we've given it enough power, and it's convinced itself that it knows best or that it wants to stay in control. And so when you have the opportunity to drop into that place, it immediately sends that sensation that we have now defined as fear. Oh, this is something to be afraid of. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we honor that because fear means death or destruction or something that I'm meant to avoid. And so it's kind of won in that battle for a long time. But to get to a place to know that we can redefine those sensations, and when we feel that immediate fear, the complete opposite, I think, is love, is to think of that highest vibrational energy that you can come from, either if it's for yourself, for humanity, for all of existence and creation, that highest vibration where fear can't take over. And see if you can hold on to that in that moment and allow that to help drop you into that space. Also, I think something that helps is to energetically set yourself up. So when you know you're going to maybe try to enter into these things, one, get rid of any expectation or judgment that you'll have to try, because really it's the elimination of trying, of desiring, of trying to think, I need to be different, I need to be better. You are absolutely perfect. It's just letting the layers melt off. And so knowing that I don't have to be different, I just have to change my perspective of the situation, because I am already at peace. I am already the source and the seer and the observer that exists behind all the chaos. So I think setting yourself up to get ready for the meditations by doing some breath work, alternating the nostrils is a good one on Aloma Viloma. There are a couple different breathwork exercises or some kriyas that you can do just for a couple minutes, 1 to 3 minutes, that will help recharge the electromagnetic system and the electromagnetic field that exists outside the body. And so you literally change the energy field and the pattern that the brain is fluctuating at. You can bring that down a little bit. And so that you're in more of a sacred place and have a little bit of more of a foundation underneath you. So as you start to drop into that place, you can somehow kind of take control over that sense of fear and see it coming before it even gets there. Before the fear is fear, you'll notice the sensations in the body are changing. Oh, my breathing is already changing. I'm starting to feel that irritated feeling. I'm starting to feel the adrenaline of needing to run. That fight or flight mode is a real thing and kicks in. And so you immediately want to get up. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to be in this place. So knowing how the body changes and being able to receive and be aware of those subtle shifts will prevent that rapid change, that fear from hitting you hard enough to say, I'm not sure I'm ready for this.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'm gonna have to try that. You're like, be prepared for it before it comes. Yeah, that's good. You mentioned, what was that? The aromatherapy. Did you mention aromatherapy but what are some recommendations for that?
I like aromatherapy because I like to remove people from as much of the pharmaceutical world as we can get away from. And a lot of our pharmaceuticals are actually based on different chemicals or phytochemicals that are found in a lot of different plants. They remove them and essentially try to mimic them. And the problem is then we've taken out of their purest natural form. And with aromatherapy, we have such a concentrated variety of these different plants available to us for rapid healing. The molecules are so small that they break through the blood-brain barrier and they have an almost immediate effect. So I just like aromatherapy because it's pretty much instantaneous. You know, anybody who uses just a little dab of something or has a diffuser at home often notices their mood will shift really quickly. I like to make a lot of the sprays for people to take around and just kind of clear their space a little bit. You can have it in the car when you're teaching a class, you know, before things like this, if you have work and some stuff and you just feel a little bit out of alignment, you just don't feel quite right, especially for females. We're a lot of times a little bit more overly affected by the pull of the moon and our specific cycles and things like that. And so hormonally, we can start to feel out of balance. And there's essential oils that will really help to kind of shift that. And especially in today's world when we're dealing with a lot of extra pollution, a lot of all these extra blankets of electromagnetic fields from, you know, our phones and our Bluetooth and our computer, the wireless router that's everywhere, all of that stuff takes such a toll on the body that people are just now beginning to figure out. And having these simple tools to really help bring the system up, it again incorporates things like quantum physics and even just nutritional aspect of how we interact with plants in our environment. But when you go back to a vibrational frequency and that we remember when we're not all solid, we're this, you know, constantly shifting, constantly vibrating. And with essential oils, you can really rapidly lift the vibrational frequency of the cells of the body. And when you remember to think, I'm a community of things, I'm not this one physical form, you start to think, how can I take care of each piece of the puzzle? You know, not just food for the body, but the right hydration for the cells, and again, how to uplift the frequency of things. So I like aromatherapy for that, in the sense that it's not necessarily a quick fix, but it's something that you can feel the rapid change of pretty quickly. And again, I like efficiency, so maybe that's part of it. I also think that we're really disconnected from the plant and outside world, so it kind of helps to bring that back in, especially for people who are living in the city and don't have a way to get out to, you know, like wherever you are looks beautiful outside right now. And some people don't have access to that, or they might be struggling in recovery, different places where having extra time to just put themselves under a tree doesn't even seem fathomable to some people. I work at an addiction recovery center and a grief counseling place. And the idea of taking more time out of their day to just kind of relax and unwind isn't even on some people's radar. You know, we come from it from a perspective of like, it's just part of life. You know, we kind of build these holes in our schedules to make sure that this is something we do because we know how drastically it affects our health. But there are other people I've been encountering since I've been living in the Phoenix area that they just don't have regular access to stuff like that. And it's something small. You can just slip a little bottle of something, of a nice blend in your pocket and carry it around with you. And then have that, you know, throughout all of the day, instead of having to pop a pill for a headache and another pill for arthritis and then this other pill to offset those other pills, you know. I just think it's a holistic and efficient way to help treat so many different things in the body.
And also the smell, like the olfactory, like it really triggers other senses and it sharpens everything else.
Yeah, it uses, you know, you get to interact both hemispheres of the brain. And those smells, if you attach them to a positive outlook, they will help continue to bring that vibration into your space as well. So it's mood altering. It's super healing. Most essential oils are like anti-everything. A lot of them are antimicrobial all across the board, like antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, all these things that we look for an expensive, you know, something at the pharmacy, not even necessarily pharmaceutical over the counter, but just something at Target, you would just go into the medical little side of things, and instead of picking this beautiful plant that has the ability to take care of that, we're so conditioned because these other companies want to make money. And is one of the things that I talk about in holistic healthcare, why I traveled and stayed overseas for so long, because we had so much more access to that over there. And there are so many other different companies, even insurance companies, healthcare providers that actually use essential oil in their treatment. And it's something that we don't do regularly here in the West because I think they just don't want you to. I think they can't patent a plant. They can't patent a specific item and a certain leaf and sell it to you for profit. So, it just kind of comes down to the powers that be.
I know, and the thing is also a lot of these people in the medical field that they're not knowledgeable about it. What they learn is in school in their medical profession is those drugs.
Yeah.
And then, so that's what they know, and that's how they got to share with others.
And the worst part is now we found out that the companies making the drugs are the companies that are now involved in influencing the curriculum. So how do you fix that? Because the company who ran the test, who paid to sponsor the test, is the same company who puts out the textbook, who gives it to the people you're talking about, who then don't even have that education at all. They're just now starting to push nutrition classes in some of the medical curriculum. And you think that's crazy. Plants and food should be the first form of medicine.
Well, for a quick fix, well, even not even quick fix, like certain things, they'd be like, oh, like you have allergies or headaches or digestive system issues. They just pop a pill and then, that'll get rid of it temporarily, but you can't, the long term is still not going to resolve the issue.
Yeah. And there are some things like we're learning, now that even the cannabis world is coming up and utilizing different extractions and things like that we have this access to all these different plants. And some of those effects can be immediate as well. So that quick fix that we might need in the moment to get through the day, to get through the meeting, like you're saying, we've got a headache or something that we do sort of need a quick fix for. But it's rebranding and getting that information out there and getting people to accept and trust that there are some other quick fixes that don't involve these things that we've become familiar with. And we say that we want to see change, but on an individual level, it's really difficult for people to actually transform themselves. And it's just been years of the layer, again, that preconceived notion that they buy into what they've known. And we've had marketing analysis and research be what has essentially sold us. The market research that began several decades ago had a lot to do with psychology at the time. They hired psychologists and they ran these tests and they decided to do product research and see, how am I going to sell this to more people? And we bought into it. And then unfortunately, we thought that our well-being was looked after by the powers that be. And as it turns out, it's just been about profit. Even the doctor who came up with the food pyramid, she finally came out how many decades later and said that wasn't my pyramid. They switched it upside down. They basically did it depending on who was in charge at the time and who wanted to make money. And so to get people not to just completely tear apart their belief system, but to get people to feel comfortable to question authority and to kind of trust that shaking things up doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but it can be revolutionary. And I think there's so much power in where we spend the dollar and who we give our money to from those kind of aspects. Are you going to continue to give them to the powers that have misled you and bold-faced lied to you and put out information that we now know is incorrect, instead of listening to all this other research? But then people are always asking, how do I know? 1 minute I get all this information on this is how I should be eating, and the very next minute it's a completely different story. And so what do? What are people meant to do? And that's why I go back to giving people tools, having them have the courage and the ability to make the time and space and then delve into the practice, because it's only through that practice that you're going to come to those conclusions. Because we can continue to fight the good fight all day long, but your message is only going to be received by those who are already receptive, who are already kind of switched on in a certain way. With the other individuals, you're just always planting seeds, hoping that they're going to root, hoping that there's going to be a change. But the best thing for them is for them to jump into a practice and figure out what's true for themselves. And then it changes. You're not really fighting any fight. You're just continuing to allow people to step into their own transformation.
And as you mentioned, that the practice helps, because the more you practice, the more you feel like it's almost like you don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
It's almost like I used to eat a lot of meat, and I wasn't eating very healthy. But then the more I practice, the more like I don't want that stuff anymore. I want to eat healthier. I want to eat more greens. I want to be with nature more. It just naturally happens.
And that's it. That's the way someone's going to get there, is you give them that, what I like to call like a gentle nudge, and see if they can open themselves up to the practice, because that's what's going to have those long-lasting changes. Someone else just asked me that, last night or the night before. She said, do you think the more I get into my practice, I'm going to change how I eat? Because she said, everybody I know, the more they practice, the more all that stuff changes. And I said, it happens because I think it's a vibrational frequency thing. As you continue to practice, your vibrational frequency continues to elevate. And then like attracts like. What you're vibrating at is what you send out to the universe, and that's what you draw back into your universe. And so you start to realize that there's these other things that you didn't even realize were bringing you down cognitively, consciously, and vibrationally, that you were so dialed into the gross that you couldn't feel the subtle just yet. And now that you're starting to tap into it, you notice those changes more significantly. And so it's not about convincing something to somebody that this is wrong or you shouldn't do this, because that's just weighing good and bad. And there will always be both sides to that coin. And it's always going to be based on your experience and how you define right and wrong, or morality, or ethics. And we could argue that. Philosophy's been arguing that for generations, and they never really get to an answer. But the people who really seem like they find their truth are always the practitioners, the sages who jump into that space. And then all of a sudden, it's not about good or bad. It's just about what's true and what resonates with me as an individual. And what you find just happens to be the people who drop into that space seem to be vibrating at a similar frequency and seem to continuously come up with the same answers or the same response. But they're not trying to convince anybody of anything. They're just living from a place of love and compassion, because they've been on the other side. They know what it's like, and they just want you to come out of that darkness. They want to see you lift the veil, and that's what it becomes. Is it's not this, I'm teaching you this from a place of ego and from trying to convince you of anything. It should always be your own unfolding. Like you're saying, it just started to happen on its own. So I tell people, be wary of a teacher that's trying to convince you that this is how it should be. They should just lovingly give you the opportunity to step into your own truth, to continue to give you tools. If you think one's not working, then they should give you another one, instead of judging you and telling you, granted, you have to do the work. There's no shortcut, there's no quick fix.
Because once you experience it yourself, that's when you realize it's beneficial for me, and I don't want to go back to the old ways because it wasn't making me feel good. And the whole mental clarity thing with what we eat, right?
Yeah, because someone can try to convince you of it all day long. It's not until you step into the realization and you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Speaking of essential oils, and you mentioned for topical use, for smelling it, for what's your opinion on ingesting it, like making it put it in food and in drinks?
I think for most people in the beginning, it can be really concentrated, and you have to step into that transition with a lot of guidance and just being really aware of the plant that you're ingesting, because you can get so much of it by inhaling it. People think it's not in my system, I just sniffed it. But anything you smell, you're essentially ingesting on a molecular level. So that is efficient enough. They are so super concentrated, the essential oils. You're getting so much of the plant essence in that tiny little bottle. So to start ingesting it, as far as putting it in drinks, I think it depends on the plant. It depends on what you're trying to bring about. And I think you should just go into it with the right guidance, because some, if you mix the wrong two together, it could leave you with digestion issues or stomach pains or problems. The internal organs and the tissues are very sensitive. The skin is a lot more durable. It can handle more pollution. It can handle more toxicity, more heat, more weather, things like that. And when you put something on the inside, it's going to absorb a little bit differently. So it depends on what you're trying to combine it with. Like, there are some essential oils that you can use a tiny bit to cook with, instead of necessarily, say you put a ton of cilantro in something and maybe you don't have access to it, but you put a teeny tiny bit of cilantro essential oil in something, that could be fine. And you're combining it with a whole bunch of other things. But to put many drops of one essential oil into a small glass or bottle of water, it could bother the system. So I just tell people, be really careful of somebody who's telling you to ingest. Know where they're coming from and what their experience and their education level is, and just be mindful about any symptoms that you might experience. Maybe write that down so that you know to correlate that with what you're doing, so that you can maybe alter the amount or the dosage that you're ingesting. It's not necessarily good or bad. I just think it's something people need to be more cautious of than just topical or diffusion. Seems to work for a lot of people. A mix and the spray works really well, because some people can't even handle neat on their skin. It has to be with a carrier oil or even just diluted with water. So if you know that oil has a strong effect on you neat as well, I would definitely be mindful about ingesting that, because if it's already irritating that much just on the outside skin surface, it can really irritate you through the digestive process. And then you've hit a whole bunch of stuff along the way. So it could bother you for a while.
That's so true. Oh yeah, the quality and the purity, and where they come from. So when you look at different brands of essential oils, what characteristics or qualities do you look for to determine where you purchase them from?
I think anywhere that has full disclosure. If you're looking online, there can be a report that is given after the distillation process to tell you the different counts and the potency and about the plant itself. So anywhere that fully discloses those reports and has all the information out there, those are good ones. If you have access to testing them before you purchase them, that's always a good route to go until you have a supplier that you feel that has a reputable product that you can rely on, repeatedly. Because sometimes you'll just know. You don't necessarily know in the beginning. You're not sure. You're like, is this supposed to smell this way? It's kind of nice, but in concentrated form, it's not always as what you would think, the floral smells or things like that. You're like, well, I really like this plant and I thought it would smell different, but in a super concentrated form, it could be the top portion of the plant, could be the stems, it could be, all these different things. So educating yourself on those aspects, knowing what you're getting into. But I find a lot of times intuitively, you just kind of know. one, hopefully they're not lying to you. You want to look for the label that says 100% pure essential oil, not something that says natural, because that can be defined as a few different things, and not a label that kind of hides that information. If you feel like you have to dig to find it, it's kind of a red flag. They should upfront, right in the beginning, be able to sing, loudly, 100% pure essential oil. So if you're digging through, especially blends, they'll have like some kind of, it's 100% pure. 100% pure what? So be mindful about labeling, because there's not a lot of regulations that monitor certain phrases that we have come to define in a little bit of a shady manner here in the US. So I do source things from overseas when I go, when I know that I have a reputable vendor that I can't necessarily ship into the US for whatever reason, or I can't get in bulk here. And just testing them yourself. Sometimes you might not know the smell that you're looking for, but there's a feeling. If you're like, I don't know, just trust your gut, because again, it's such a high lifting vibrational frequency that you should feel good. Even if it's an oil meant to be for healing a cut or antifungal for something you're dealing with your toes, or your belly issues, and you're just putting it on topically because you're having digestive or cramps or gassing problems. There should be either that sense of ease or uplift from the plant. And if you're getting it and you just feel like you're being rubbed the wrong way, just get rid of it. Don't chance it. Don't chance that you're putting this terrible chemical on you. And I tell people, when you start to utilize essential oils or you start to delve into your practice deeper, also know the same, like you're saying, how your diet starts to evolve. Know that you might also need to evolve your product line. And it's something that I speak very highly of, because your skin is the first line of defense. But what you put on your skin, you absorb into your system. It can eventually just make its way to your bloodstream. So you're not supposed to put anything on your skin that you wouldn't put in your mouth. So if you have a lotion that you're like, I wouldn't eat that, then you shouldn't be wearing it. And it's the same for all the soaps, all the shampoos. If there's a high level of all these synthetic chemicals and preservatives, you don't want them. And you'll start to notice that things just, they rub you the wrong way. Like you're saying with food, you're just driven to eat differently. So you might start to notice that with your products, especially if you delve into aromatherapy and essential oils, that some of your products you might start to energetically shy away from, and you're not realizing what's happening. So I tell people, kind of keep that in the forefront of your mind when you're going through this transition, because you might bit by bit not necessarily throw everything away, but as you buy the next version of that product, the next oil, the next lotion, the next soap, you might buy a nicer, more holistic brand of it instead of the cheapest one. And I know for some people, the price point has a lot to do with what they can afford and what they can bring into their life. But the one encouraging thing I have to say about that is I can go through a considerable amount less of things as I've transitioned to living holistically with my skincare line and things like that. I use less. So even though my oil might cost a little bit more because I'm buying a higher quality, I don't have to burn through the same products anymore. I don't wash my face the same, so I don't have to put the same amount of oil or lotion because it's not as dry. So all these different things will continue to kind of surface, and you'll realize, plus as we age, our skincare changes, all these other things that we used to do, you're like, oh, I don't know if that's working anymore. But as you also delve into your practice, keep in mind that that might be something to watch for. You might realize what you're using on your skin doesn't work, or the deodorant you've been using, you're like, I don't know, this used to smell really good to me and it doesn't anymore. So I throw that out there just to let people know that's normal. That's because you're now sensitive to what's a chemical smell. What's a synthetic fragrance versus all natural is going to kind of start to put you off. You might even notice that candles or things that you liked could even start to give you a headache now. So just noticing and being mindful that if that happens, it's a normal part of the process. You might want to consider changing some of your also cleaning products and just the things that you're around in your house from day to day.
You said, because see how your body feels. How about, it could be, let's just say this particular brand is just really strong for me. It gives me headaches and I'm not used to it. It's not for me, or I'm allergic to it. But then it might work for somebody else.
Right.
Because of their body composition and everything.
Right. It's like incense. I like to do a lot of clearing of space. In my house, I can burn incense all day long, either in stick form or in resin form. I make a few different things. You can get them in powders. I love Palo Santo, things that really help to clear space. But some other people are super sensitive to it. In a lot of my classes, I can't use it because I have a lot of people that will immediately get a headache or not feel good, or it will fire up some chronic respiratory issues that they have. Whereas, I love it. I have no negative response to it whatsoever. And I feel like energetically it helps me in my home. Mm-hmm. So like you're saying, what works for one person won't always work for another, which is why I try to tell people, be wary of somebody trying to sell you something. If you're like, but I don't know, trust that gut. We have learned in society to push that voice down, to not listen to it, to feel like somehow we're not good enough. We're not smart enough. How could I possibly know the answer to that? And then you start to realize, wait a minute, I can trust myself. I can trust that voice in there that's really trying to look out for me. And I usually tell people, just see if you can find that intuition, because really that's usually the right answer. You start to figure out what's the mind yelling at you and trying to convince you of something versus the true self really calmly guiding you and giving you an answer. And you know it. You know when it's in there and you're like, yeah, every time I don't listen to that voice, it's always been wrong. You're like, why don't I listen? So just that trust, that faith, to know that you're right most of the time.
Definitely. And that's why dowsing is important. I don't know if you know much about dowsing, but I've tried a couple of times and I haven't really gotten it right yet, but you can do this dowsing technique. My phone is about to die. We're not finished with the interview yet. Can I just maybe go charge my phone and then we can come back again? Or if you have other things to do, maybe I can, you could come back again for part 2, because I do want to talk to you more. And this sucks because I have 1% battery left.
Okay. Yeah, just shoot me a message when you get charged up and we'll figure out. Okay.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
Okay.